Then when we start thinking about the quality of the sales relationship with those financial touch points, then we start to see very interesting trends in the cash collection environment, which is internally at Upflow here. What we do is we make the salesperson chase the first invoice with the point of contact in finance that they sold to. And that gets the first invoice paid. And we see a direct correlation between the first invoice paid on time and then subsequent invoices being paid on time.
Welcome to Revenue Insights. We're joined by revenue leaders from some of the highest growth companies. Together, we explore how they built their revenue teams, the journeys they've been on, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Revenue Insights is brought to you by Ebsta. We're an AI-first revenue intelligence platform designed to help you close more deals, retain more customers, and forecast better. Enjoy the podcast.
Hello, everybody. On today's episode of the Revenue Insights podcast, I am thrilled and delighted to have Brad Cross, the Global VP of Sales at Upflow, joining us. With over 20 years of experience scaling SaaS startups and leading revenue teams, Brad has been at the forefront of transforming the B2B payment industry. At Upflow, Brad has revolutionized the way companies handle cash flow management, turning the often overlooked payment process into a key driver for customer loyalty and growth. Brad's insights into sales leadership, customer success, and leveraging data for revenue optimization, I'm sure will provide valuable takeaways for all of our listeners. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Well, let's start, Brad. You've had a diverse career leading sales teams across all different sectors. Can you share a little bit about your journey that got you here and what drew you into that FinTech space?
Yeah, very interesting first question. So we've missed a small promotion. I went from VP of Global Sales to CRO just recently. So my remit has expanded a little bit, now managing sales and customer success and marketing and operations. So a slightly broader remit than I've traditionally had. As you said, I've spent the last 20 years managing sales teams primarily and now into customer success as well. Spent most of my career in MarTech. So telling marketing solutions to large enterprise organizations, always on the basis of big data, always on the basis in a number of different disciplines. So I started out selling databases to people like Manchester United and Nectar in the UK and things like that, helping them understand who the customer is and how to engage them with the right message at the right time in order to get them to purchase more effectively. Move through into email, into social media, into paid search, but always on the basis of understanding who the customer is and how to engage them in a more effective way. This transfer across into FinTech is very interesting for me because when I engaged with Upflow, it felt like the standard way of trying to approach the cash inflow problem in this space was thinking about automation. But what we've identified is that it's not so much a basic automation play as a quality of engagement play. And therefore, that dynamic of trying to understand who is the customer, who is the person that owes us the money, is it a person, is it a group of people, different organizations have different structures for how they pay. How do we understand that customer unit? And how do we understand how to engage them with the right message at the right time to get them to actually pay their invoice is very similar to the dynamic that I've had in the past. So it's a departure from MarTech into FinTech, but actually what we are pushing or promoting from an Upflow point of view at the moment is a financial relationship management system, which is basically like a CRM for the finance team, because what we're dealing with here is an additional customer touch point, which in the past has been overlooked and not invested. That's how I got from MarTech into FinTech, and it was bridging across with actually, yes, this is a different space, but it's the same discipline, it's the same tactics, and it's the same metrics, and it's the same dynamics that we're talking about.
Yeah, we sometimes forget that ultimately, at the end of the day, we're still selling to people, right? And whether it's top of the funnel or in your case dealing with the finance function, you're still dealing with individuals, right? And people need to have that connection, and that's kind of how businesses are run.
Yes, and interestingly, in this space, the people on both sides of that divide have traditionally not had a lot of experience in dealing with people or not been very good at dealing with people. So if I'm thinking of the finance team within your business, engaging the finance team within their business, and then trying to engage higher up when they need to escalate, there's not a lot of tools, a lot of investment in IP, a lot of innate tactics or ability to understand how to engage people like there would be in a sales or marketing discipline. So we really are giving people who haven't got much natural ability to do this a tool that helps them to be much more effective in how they engage those customers. And it's important to think about this as part of the holistic customer engagement strategy, because you invest all that time selling a customer, and then you invest all that time in customer success to optimize that experience. And then someone from finance comes in with their hobnail boots on and is a little too brisk in chasing the invoice. And then suddenly what we see is that those customers don't like working with you anymore, and then they churn. So again, it's an underinvested space where, if we think about it as another customer touch point in the context of the rest of the customer journey, it's an important, if you're not careful, churn driving touch point, which can be overlooked.
It's fascinating. So those that know of Ebsta, we pride ourselves in the kind of our value proposition is all around this principle that relationships still drive revenue, even in today's market, right? And really getting under the skin of what relationships we have at each customer, and who's engaging with those particular personas is huge. Most people will know we produce our B2B benchmark report every year, and one of the interesting data points over the last year in particular is looking at the influence the finance persona has, not just on the buying cycle, and then on the retention process as well. And it's amazing to see when you look at bear in mind we analysed 4.7 million opportunities last year. And what we're able to see is the influence of that finance persona on the win rates is huge, and has never been as high as it is at the moment. And if the sellers wait until they're ready to present back a solution to start engaging with the finance persona in that sales cycle, their win rates are materially lower. I think it's over 20% lower than if they're able to get that finance persona actually involved in that ROI business case building in the first place. So we know that the relationships have a big influence across the customer.
Yeah, 100%. And then when we start thinking about the quality of the sales relationship with those financial touch points, then we start to see very interesting trends in the cash collection environment, which is internally at Upflow here. What we do is we make the salesperson chase the first invoice with the point of contact in finance that they sold to. And that gets the first invoice paid, and we see a direct correlation between the first invoice paid on time and then subsequent invoices being paid on time. So that's a very interesting point of leveraging that relationship, which has already been established. And then using that going forwards, we think about, well, is finance chasing? Is customer success chasing? Do we need to bring the salesperson back in? How do we make sure that we're getting paid on time? Because, bookings is vanity, but payments is sanity. And how do we make sure that as we're going through this process, at the end of the first year, the second year, the third year, so we can maximize lifetime value, how are we making sure that we're still front of mind, we're presenting value, we're offsetting the request for more payments with the demonstration of additional value and the improvement of the relationships?
No, it's fascinating stuff. What we as part of the report this year, we started looking at this customer success journey. So, post-sale through to renewal, upsell, cross-sell, and churn. And what was fascinating is companies that are running QBRs, quarterly business reviews with their customer, they are 7 times more likely to get a cross-sell or upsell opportunity if the last 2 QBRs have been run with the C-suite. And they are 4 times more likely to have a churn experience if they run their QBRs with a junior resource. And so it just shows you the influence of different personas on outcomes, and how we need to nurture these relationships. And it's really interesting, especially in a world where AI, my goodness, it took us nearly 8 minutes to get into AI, but AI is becoming such a big part of everyday life. And while I think there's definitely a place in using AI in the sales cycle, primarily to take away the burden of all the stuff that salespeople aren't very good at in the first place. But the idea of trying to use AI to replicate this relationship building exercise, this trust exercise, it's not that. This is where the people come onto their own, and in particular, salespeople are very good at building and maintaining those relationships. So it's a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah, it's really interesting because if we think about how Upflow works, one of the things that is core to our value proposition is collating data from every touch point we've had with the customer in relation to getting paid. So creating a centralized timeline which has everyone's outreach and the response of the customer, any payments they've made, credits they've made, promise to pay, disputes, any of that sort of stuff. We're finding exactly the same thing. If we summarize all of that in one place, there's a huge value to that, but that's quite a rich stream. So actually we take AI and use that to summarize what AI is reading in that data stream, and then presenting that back to a person, but always keeping a human in the loop, because we find that it needs a human touch to make sure that what we're doing is contextually relevant to the engagement with the prospect. If we need to get a little pushy, and some of the businesses we see, I'm worried for them in some cases when we engage. So if I engage with a $120 million ARR business, and they say, well, actually $60 million of that is at least 180 days overdue, and we don't start chasing until we get to 120 days overdue because we don't have the resource to do that, then of course at 120 days overdue, you're 4 months behind on paying. So the tone of voice at that point in time is pretty strong. There's a very delicate balance with 50% of my, if I was the CEO of that business, I'd be very frustrated, but there's 50% of my revenue which hasn't been paid, and I'm potentially jeopardizing the retention of that business by having finance people being very strong in, hey, you haven't paid us and you need to pay. So we need to be absolutely on top of all the information that's happened in the chain up to that point, any automated outreach, anything that's wrong with the invoice, any touch points the sales or CS might have had where they talk about payments. If we don't have all that information, we can be off base in terms of how we communicate, frustrate the customer. They either don't pay or they pay, but then they churn at the end of the cycle. And it's half my revenue that's out there that's at risk like this. So if we think about that dynamic, again, that data summary by AI, brilliant, because it takes away the 5 minutes I've got to spend to trawl through that feed. But I still want that human touch at the end of the process to just make sure that when a human's dealing with a human, they're doing it in the right and most sensitive way to get the right result.
Yeah, I absolutely buy into that. And as I say, we built a business on this principle that relationships drive revenue and trying to measure that momentum. But so look, you joined the business, nearly 3 years ago now. What state was the business in? How big was the sales team? And what journey have you gone through over the last 3 years?
It's a very good question. It's been a really interesting ride. So when I joined the business, this is a very professional and proficient business. I don't know whether this is because it's FinTech compared to MarTech, but it's run very well and very professionally, and it's run by engineers. So when I joined, the positive that I had was a very strong, very solid product. The product is very good. It works really well. It looks really good. They've invested in simplicity. The competitors on the market are obviously more of a kind of old school clunky finance tool, where this is more of a business tool. So that was a real plus point. I've worked for some organizations where you don't necessarily want to give a demo because things aren't quite as slick as you might like them to be. Whereas here it was, we don't do PowerPoint, we show the tech, and the tech is great, so people like the tech. The flip side of that was that the sales approach was, let's just get people demos, and when they see how cool the tech is, they're obviously going to want to buy more software. And in today's world, people have enough software, they don't necessarily want to buy any more. So what we've done is we've evolved the sales process from that simple, here's a demo of a piece of technology that automates your process, along with spending a lot of time invested in understanding, well, what's the business case and what's the use case, and how do we actually improve the quality of engagement, not just automate the outreach itself. And we've gone from a demo-led, product-led sell to more of a solution and value-led sell. And it's now much more about understanding, okay, where are you as a business? Is this about getting paid quicker? Are things taking too long? Or is it about warding off bad debt because you really have some bad payers? And, if you don't get on top of that really quickly, you're going to have a big hole in your finances. Or is it more about automation? Or is it more about context and improvement of relationships? Your NPS, your CSAT are too low post-finance touch point. And we need to improve that because your churn's too high. So we're engaging those customers much more on that basis. We morphed the sales process from just purely product-led to value-led. We've built a free AI diagnostics tool which hooks into the customer's data and shows them the problem in their own data. So that's been really useful in helping to understand, okay, cool, this is the size of the problem, this is the priority you should put on it, and this is the nature of the problem. And then we evolved the sales process from just a straight 12-month contract to, we do a 12-month contract with a 3-month proof of concept aligned to some very strong value KPIs. And if we don't hit those, we give you your money back. So that's helped us get from about a 12% close rate to almost a 50% close rate now on direct outreach. If I take inbound, outbound, and alliances into account, we're probably around 38% blended. But on direct outreach, we're about 48% close rate. And that's just because we have that diligence in the process to understand the problem and present that back. And as you said, we are now very conscious of the fact that this is not automation for AR and cash collection managers. This is about business cash flow for VP of Finance and CFO. And once we understood the trajectory has been really interesting, because if we think about how CFOs think, traditionally they've thought the game that I'm playing in cash flow is around accounts payable. So the cash inflow will happen at a set speed, and there's nothing I can really do about that. People will pay as fast as they pay. And as long as I understand and predict and forecast that, then I know what's coming in. And the game I'm playing is how quickly I pay the invoices going out. And that's where the focus has been. But now we've been able to demonstrate that actually, if you get the process, the practice, the strategy right on the cash collection, you can make a dramatic improvement to how quickly you get paid. So that's helped the CFOs and the VPs of finance shift the focus and say, well, actually, there's two sides to this game, whereas before I only thought there was just the one side. And that's why the AP vertical has grown so much quicker than AR, because previously it was just about, let's just automate that process because it's a pain. Whereas now it's like, well, actually, if we want to get our DSO, day sales outstanding, down from 120 days to 25 days, which is highly possible, we can invest a bit of time and effort over here. So it's gone from a kind of functional play to a strategic play, and the sales process has evolved with that trajectory. And now we have that ownership of the kind of, as I said, the financial relationship management element. And that's where we're engaging with the CFOs, engaging with the VPs of finance, and getting more traction with making a difference to businesses.
We'll return to the episode in a moment. This podcast is brought to you by Ebsta. Every year, we produce the B2B Sales Benchmarks Report. It provides insights from the analysis of billions of revenue dollars, revealing what attributes drive top sales performance and highlighting where time and money are wasted. To get early access to this year's Benchmarks Report, sign up for our newsletter at ebsta.com/newsletter. Now, back to Revenue Insights.
It's an amazing story to hear, and very similar to one we've gone through ourselves. You know, we presented Ebsta as kind of revenue intelligence for a long time, and well, look, here's your forecast, and what more do you need? AI is driving your number, right? But in reality, where we've landed is that our sweet spot of finding businesses where there's a big delta between the top performing sales reps and the rest of the sales team. It turns out what we're really good at is understanding what the top performers are doing at every stage of the sales cycle and using that to prompt the B and C players as to what they should be doing. And the way we fix the data from the past means that we're able to do benchmarking in a way that our peers and our competitors don't. So we've ended up leaning into that. And again, it's transformed the way we sell and the types of businesses that we sell to. We really now understand what our ICP is. And I think that's something that you only learn by kind of trial and error and pushing forward. But that whole kind of going from a point solution and let me just show you how the product works to let's really get under the skin of how big is the problem. And ultimately, the other thing that we saw, the other thing we did was, our value proposition is quite a complex thing to get across. You're talking about, really transforming a sales team to becoming a lot more data driven. And so trying to get that, articulate that value proposition was always a little bit difficult. And we literally in the last 3 months, we've launched what we call our brand guarantees. And it just distills it down into something that people can digest. And if they've got that problem, they put their hand up. And it's amazing how much easier it is for them to understand. And so our brand guarantee that we just launched was that we guarantee to get more of the reps hitting quota within 6 months. And like you, if we don't do that, the customers can terminate. We're quite happy for them to, and we've not lost one yet, but we're very confident of the impact we can have. And so it kind of did two things for us. The first one was, if in the first discovery meeting we find out that, they're all hitting quota or no one's hitting quota, well then, you know what, that's great, good luck. We're not here we can't help you. But at least you're able to close those opportunities off as lost sooner. And then when you do come across a customer where they've got that problem, where there is a lot of difference between how the different sales members are kind of going to market, you can introduce that consistency in a remarkably fast amount of time and have a big impact on this quarter's numbers. So distilling it down into kind of right, we know what our ICP is, we know the value prop and how we can have an impact. It transformed our business, and it sounds like it did the same for you.
Yeah, and if I could ask a question, where is your ICP? Where does that sit?
So our customers all have to be using Salesforce or HubSpot because we integrate into their CRM. We only service B2B customers because our whole value proposition is around this principle that relationships drive revenue, and we score the momentum of engagement with every stakeholder involved in the sales process by connecting into mailboxes, calendars, phone systems, and so on. And our sweet spot are companies where they've got somewhere between 20 and 250 sellers. We have a few smaller, we have a few larger, but kind of 20 to 250 means that we know we can run a relatively short sales cycle. We can get the customers up and running in 30 days. So 3 brand guarantees. The third one is that we get customers live in 30 days. And when you get into larger, one of the things that really affected us, we're a bootstrap business with 360 customers now, right? So one of the things that we had a real challenge with was we won a proof of concept with Accenture, and it took us a year. It took us a year to get that rolled out, and the ROI was phenomenal. Showing large organizations how they can use engagement scoring to see when relationships are dropping off, and they can do something about it, or course correct, or close off as lost. The impact on the business was material. Unfortunately, by the time we got to present back the solution, our stakeholders had moved on, and we'd lost that momentum. And so the sales cycle cost us a lot of money and a lot of time and energy, but it wasn't, it was our fault, but we weren't really geared up to do that enterprise sale. So knowing what our market was and who we are and who we're good to sell to really helped. It was a painful lesson, but it certainly served us.
Really interesting, really interesting. So we've been through a similar trajectory, and our ICP is definitely that mid-market range. So if we think about anything from $3 million turnover to $1 billion turnover, if we think about tech or SaaS companies, which is where our sweet spot lies, typically it's in that kind of $50 to $500 million bracket where we really see a sweet spot. And similar to you, less than 30 days to onboard. We have a 3-click onboarding process, and then it's just configuration in the platform. So usually 2 to 3 weeks to get people up and running. But we really have that interesting stage of business where they're big enough that they are starting to invest in people to do the work. So it's viable to think of this as a discipline much smaller than that, and they just want automation because the CFO or CEO is doing the cash collection themselves, and they just want the problem to go away. But now they're starting to invest in people to do the work. So again, if we have that value-led sales approach, it's like, well, actually, I'm showing you something that has a tangible outcome that if you invest a bit of time in, you can achieve that viably for your business. But also, if you didn't have this kind of tool, then you'd go and invest in 10 or 15 people to do it. Whereas you could invest in 3 or 4 people to manage this process as you go from 50 to 200 to $300 million in turnover. So that identifying that sweet spot where it was viable to invest in this kind of practice and valuable to invest in this kind of practice, but also you're not, a $1 billion company where you've got 150 people where you can just throw all those engineers at the problem and solve it that way. So really interesting for us as well to be really hooked into what is the ICP and where do we present the most value.
Yeah, and one of the interesting data points we saw this year was the volume of leads most organizations are tackling is actually grown by 25%. So I think a lot of businesses missed target in 2023. And so 2024, they just threw lots of marketing dollars at the problem. Option one, let's train the sales team as to how to become more consultative and more data driven. Or we could just spend a little more money on marketing. And guess what? Most people just did that. But the problem there is that while more leads came in, the number of leads that matched ICP really didn't change. So we ended up in a place where the sales team were busier than ever. The top performers can smell out the real ICP opportunities, and then the rest of the sales team are just kind of flooded with deals that just don't mean anything, that aren't real, and get distracted by them. So I think it's a key challenge.
Yeah, it takes a bit of discipline and maturity in a salesperson, I find, to be able to qualify out. It's hard not to just see all leads as money and more leads equals more money. But actually, once you've been around the block a few times, more leads is actually a bad thing if they're not the right kind of leads, because that means more work for less output and therefore less time to do my...
And I think it's the leadership, us as leaders, how many times we see sales leaders that are almost chastising the top performers for closing off too many opportunities as lost too early. When in reality, one of the data points I lean into a lot is understanding coverage that hits quota. So I might need 5 times coverage to hit quota, but you only need 2 times, right? And so knowing that means that the sales leaders looking after us can start to, don't need to chastise you for closing off deals as lost, because you don't need as much coverage to hit your number, because you know what you're doing. So I think us as leaders need to take a lot more responsibility in helping the sales team to be braver in closing those deals off as lost, because in no other industry could you spend all of your life doing a job and only 20% of that energy actually yields results, right? Any other industry, you'd see, a transformation project kicking off. But in sales, it seems okay that we're only closing 20 or 30% of the opportunities. I appreciate your numbers a lot higher, but in general,
I think the challenge for us as sales leaders is to understand the appropriate gearing of those mechanisms and those elements of the funnel to where we are as a business. Because I see two things happening. One is either we just have much too crude a measure of that. We say, well, we've got a 27-day sales cycle and a 38% close rate, and therefore everyone should work on those metrics. And it's like, well, hang on, top performer to bottom performer, there's a huge variance there. Or I see people being much too granular in the data and saying, well, we need this really sophisticated matrix type model over 15 salespeople in order to know the minutiae of everything at every given point in time. It's like, well, hang on, the right answer is probably somewhere in between. And if we've got something that's applicable and measurable and agile, but still takes into account those differences, then I can work in the appropriate way with each one of the team members. And I think we've have an exceptional sales director who works with me here at the French office in Paris, and he's incredibly honed in on the data. So he's built a very good plan for each one of those individuals to understand their funnel. It's not too cumbersome, it's not too complex, but it's just right. And if I think about achievement, the last quarter we've been an average 128% of quota achievement across the team. So, and again, before that, it was just we definitely had that divide between the top performers and the bottom performers. There were just some people who could do it, and some people we just looked at and said, well, why can't you do it? Well, of course they can't do it, because the majority of business is being driven by those top performers, and their cadence of their funnel works completely differently. So now we've got that view, we can help those guys understand exactly like you said, you need 6 times coverage. And then 6 months into the job, you might need 5. And then a year into the job, you might need 3. And once you've been here for 15 months, you might need 2, like those top performers, because now you are one. So I think being sensitive to that and having the tools that give you the data to do that is really important as well.
Oh, great. Well, while we're talking tools, Brad, why don't you walk us through your stack? What are you using in the front office?
We've got Salesforce as a backbone. We have challenged the stack quite considerably recently. We have used SalesLoft and Outreach for our prospecting. What I'm finding is a very interesting trajectory that the sales industry has been through. It started out all manual and all highly tactile people who were highly personalizing everything on a one-to-one basis and operating at relatively low volume. And I think we've been through a trajectory where we've said, well, actually, it's the volume of outreach that's going to get you there. So let's do, these kind of prospecting tools that allow you to send hundreds, if not thousands, of very automated emails. And I think now we've reached a saturation point in the market where, I don't know about you, but every time I receive an automated email, if it's not a really, really good one, I just put a filter on it and say, skip the inbox. So I think we've now got back to a point where it's like, look, unless your system's really good at making it seem like a person, if you're sending that high volume of automated emails, if you get a 1% response rate, you're absolutely flying. So we've moved away from that and back to being more personalized. And we're testing another system at the moment. It's probably not safe to say or fair to say which one it is, but we have a proof of concept running with a different system right now. And then we use all the standard enrichment tools like the Cache and Lusper and Apollo and Zoom Info and all that sort of stuff. So,
and then what about? So I appreciate top of the funnel. It sounds like you've got a really good strategy there. But are you using any tools during the sales cycle? Are you working with have you got deal rooms? Are you using call recording? What are you using for forecasting? What's going on in that side?
So no deal rooms at the moment. We use Gong for call analytics and deal forecasting and pipeline management. The forecast is in Gong as well. So Gong sits on top of Salesforce and provides us with that layer. I like Gong. I think it's a really good tool. I like the ability to just pull out snippets, to have a summary of the conversation, to just limit it to what one individual has said during that conversation. So if I care, I'm going into a call next with the VP of Finance or with the CFO, and I've got a previous call that lasted for an hour and 15 minutes, and I just want to see what they said to understand what was really important to them. I can pull that out and do that. So yeah.
We came up with our own call recorder, frankly, because Gong started doing forecasting. So we thought, right, we're going to do some call recording. Where we've actually landed, so we, for customers that don't have the call recording features, we certainly aren't as broad as Gong, but we go really deep in that discovery piece. And one of the big USPs we focus on is kind of extracting things like the qualification methodology and putting it back into Salesforce. But where we've landed with Gong now is that we've got customers that are using Gong for their call recording, but giving us access to the last year's worth of call recordings, we can start doing really interesting kind of deep dives into how well each of the reps is actually doing at that qualification cycle and process. And what's fascinating is how many deals close lost at stage 4 or 5 of a sales cycle when actually when we look back at the call recording, it turns out they were never qualified correctly in the first place. And so we've ended up with a kind of a green, amber, red on how well the customer's been qualified, and you can kind of use that to make a decision as to whether they're allowed to leave discovery or not. So it's been an interesting journey for us, and to end in a place where, look, if you've already got something that's working, stick with it. But there's so many insights you can gather from all of these disparate data sources, whether it's the call recordings or the email traffic or the calendar events or CRM. So yeah, AI can digest all of this stuff and do some amazing things with it.
I think it's a very important point or interesting point you raise. I think it's in every sales role I've had. When I've been hired, the CEO has always described that we have a great pitch, but we have a closing problem. And it's 99 times out of 100 when you dig into it, it's not a closing problem, it's a discovery problem, it's a qualification problem. And the reason you're not closing these deals is because you don't understand them properly, or you haven't understood what the value is for the customer, or they were just a bad fit in the first place. I've always entered into a sales leadership role with the CEO saying, I think the first place we need to go is some negotiation and closing training. And I've always gone back to, actually, I don't think that's right. I think you need discovery training. I think people need to be better at understanding. As you said, the top performers will be able to sniff if something's right and if there's money there. And the lower performers will need a lot of assistance in helping them understand not to just chase the ball all the time whenever they see it in play.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned kind of qualification. Is there a certain methodology that you subscribe to? Which of the obvious acronyms do you end up leaning into?
Yeah, so we have kept it simple and used BANT as our overarching qualification methodology. So we qualify the budget, the authority, the need, the timescale, and then also the tooling. So our BANT has 2 T's in it. Having a system that we integrate natively with is really important, because that allows us to fulfill the 7 to 14 days go live time. If we're integrating through an API, it's usually between 30 and 60 days to get things up and running. So that's what we generally use. And then I've been trained in Spin back in the days of old, and so I quite like Spiced, because I think Spiced is a refinement of the kind of old school Spin methodology. So we use BANT as our sales opportunity qualification methodology, and then we use the Spiced acronym as the discovery framework that sits across that. And I find the gearing of the two together is really, really useful. Yeah.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and no, really, really interesting to see. And how many sellers are you responsible for now, Brad?
So in total, I've got 10 in the US and another 12 in Europe.
And it sounds like the quotas are too low. So
yeah, we're reviewing that going into 2025. The unit economics of the business are really healthy at the moment. But again, one of the things that was inherited was a situation where, when I started, there were far too few sellers for the size of the organization. So when I started, we were 60 people and 3 people selling, and now we're 50 people and 22 people selling. So significantly changed the gearing of the business. Being in solid state on the product, obviously continually releasing and continually refining, but it needed a much heavier commercial focus than it had before. So much health.
Brad, if we were to connect in a year's time, right? We're about to celebrate Christmas 2025. So how was your year? What will you have achieved this year? What does 2025 look like for you?
We just implemented a payment gateway. So we had previously been using Stripe's payment gateway with a very thin wrapper over the front, and for complex functionality like passing on convenience fees and setting up auto pay and installment schedules and the kind of things that we want to do, that was quite restraining. So we just built our own payment gateway. Still works on Stripe rails in the background, so has all that Stripe reliability, but has our flexibility on the front end. So we'd like to be at 10 million on the SaaS product, with an additional 5 to 6 million on the payments by the end of next year. Which will be 2x growth on the SaaS and almost 3x growth for the business. So if we get to the end of the year and we've managed to achieve that, not necessarily with a corresponding increase in the size of the team, I think it's efficiency and scale we want to drive. As you mentioned, we're well over target, so maybe people could carry a slightly higher quota, but I don't want to say that through the back door now. But we increased our sales efficiency between 23 and 24 by 72% on average per person. I think if we can drive, a similar sort of increase in sales efficiency this year, then we can achieve really big numbers without a corresponding increase in the size of the team.
Amazing. Well, listen, congratulations on the growth, and the plans for this year sound incredible. Looking forward to watching the story evolve over the year ahead. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Really insightful information. And Brad, if people want to connect with you, how would they go about doing that?
Find me on LinkedIn, absolutely. Brad Cross at Upflow, or just brad at upflow.io is my email address. Feel free to reach out. Happy to connect with anyone who wants to know more or wants to chat.
Very good. Well, listen, Brad, thank you again for all your time and support, and we all look forward to watching your growth. And thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Been great to have a chat.
Very good. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to Revenue Insights from Ebsta. If you want to learn more from some of the brightest minds on how to predictably and efficiently grow revenue, then subscribe to our newsletter. We'll deliver actionable insights straight to your inbox. Go to ebsta.com/newsletter. See you soon.